In the heart of Naval Special Warfare Command, where the toughest warriors in the world gather to eat, train, and forge bonds that last a lifetime, one moment could shatter every assumption you've ever made about strength, courage, and what it truly means to serve. What happens when a simple joke about military ranks becomes the catalyst for revealing a story so extraordinary, so deeply moving, that it leaves an entire room of battle-hardened Navy SEALs sitting in stunned silence? This is not just another military story. This is about the power of words to unveil truths that change everything we think we know about the people who fight beside us. Sometimes the most profound revelations come wrapped in the most unexpected packages, and sometimes the strongest among us carry the heaviest burdens in complete silence. What you're about to discover will challenge every preconception about military service, personal sacrifice, and the incredible resilience of the human spirit. In a world where SEALs are trained to be unbreakable, what could possibly leave them speechless? The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in the Naval Special Warfare Command cafeteria, casting their familiar harsh glow across the sea of khaki uniforms and weathered faces. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Rodriguez pushed his tray along the metal rails, the institutional smell of cleaning solution and reheated food filling his nostrils. It was 1,200 hours sharp, lunch break during another grueling week of advanced tactical training at the Coronado base in California. The cafeteria hummed with the typical sounds of military dining. Metal utensils clinking against plastic trays, boots shuffling across worn linoleum floors, and the constant undercurrent of conversation punctuated by occasional bursts of laughter. This was sacred ground in its own way, a place where the most elite warriors in the world could momentarily set aside their intense focus and simply be human beings sharing a meal. Marcus had been coming to this same cafeteria for over 8 years now, ever since he'd earned his trident and joined the Brotherhood of Navy SEALs. He knew every scratch on every table, every stain on the ceiling tiles, every quirk of the ancient coffee machine that somehow always managed to produce something resembling caffeine. This place had seen him through deployments to Afghanistan, Iraq, and places that didn't officially exist on any map. It had been his refuge during the darkest moments of his career and his celebration hall during the brightest. Today felt different somehow, though he couldn't quite put his finger on why. Maybe it was the unusual mix of personnel scattered throughout the room. Along with the familiar faces of his SEAL teammates, there were members from various other Navy units, some Army Rangers who were participating in joint training exercises, and even a few Marine Force reconnaissance operators who rarely ventured into Navy territory for their meals. Marcus grabbed a turkey sandwich and a cup of coffee that could probably strip paint, then scanned the room for a place to sit. His eyes landed on a table near the center of the cafeteria where several of his teammates had already gathered. There was Lieutenant Commander Jake Hollywood Harrison, whose perfectly groomed appearance had earned him the nickname despite being one of the most lethal operators Marcus had ever worked with. Beside him sat Petty Officer First Class Tony Diesel Kowalski, a mountain of a man whose Polish grandmother's piercing blue eyes seemed oddly out of place in his intimidating frame. At the end of the table, almost as if she were deliberately positioning herself slightly apart from the group, sat Petty Officer Second Class Sarah Mitchell. At first glance, she seemed unremarkable among this gathering of warriors. Average height, athletic but not imposing, with short brown hair that met regulation standards and eyes that seemed to take in everything while revealing nothing. She'd been assigned to their unit 6 months ago, and while she'd proven herself capable during training exercises, she remained something of an enigma to her teammates. Sarah had this way of being present without being noticeable, of contributing without drawing attention to herself. During briefings, her observations were always sharp and tactical, but she delivered them in a quiet, measured tone that somehow made even the most experienced operators listen carefully. In combat simulations, she moved with a fluid efficiency that spoke of extensive training, yet she never seemed to seek the spotlight that naturally fell on exceptional performers. Marcus made his way over to the table, nodding to his teammates as he set down his tray. The conversation was already in progress, centered around the upcoming deployment schedule and speculation about their next assignment. Hollywood was holding court, as usual, regaling the table with an elaborate theory about why their commanding officer had been spending so much time in closed-door meetings with higher-ups from JSOC. "I'm telling you guys," Hollywood said, gesturing with a French fry for emphasis, "this is all the hallmarks of a priority mission. The kind where we get 48 hours notice and then disappear for 3 months to somewhere that doesn't exist on Google Maps." Diesel snorted, his massive frame shaking with suppressed laughter. "Everything's a conspiracy theory with you, Hollywood. Maybe the old man just likes talking to people who outrank him. Novel concept, I know." The banter continued as Marcus settled into his seat, but he found his attention drifting to Sarah. She was listening to the conversation with what appeared to be polite interest, occasionally nodding or making small sounds of agreement, but her eyes held a distant quality that suggested her mind was elsewhere entirely. It was a look he'd seen before, usually in the eyes of operators who'd seen too much combat too quickly, but Sarah had never deployed with their unit. In fact, now that Marcus thought about it, he realized how little any of them actually knew about Sarah's background. Her service record was classified at a level that none of them had clearance to access, which was unusual but not unheard of in the special operations community. She'd appeared one day with orders assigning her to their unit, had passed all the necessary training and evaluation requirements with flying colors, and had integrated seamlessly into their operational structure. But seamless integration in the military didn't necessarily mean personal connection, and Marcus was beginning to realize that despite working closely with Sarah for 6 months, he couldn't recall a single conversation where she'd shared anything meaningful about her past, her family, or her motivations for joining the Navy SEALs. The conversation at the table had shifted to a familiar topic, the ongoing debate about whether the recent changes to military promotion requirements were making the ranks more competitive or just more confusing. It was the kind of shop talk that could occupy military personnel for hours, filled with acronyms, regulation numbers, and strongly held opinions based on personal experience. Hollywood, never one to miss an opportunity for humor, had launched into an impression of their last promotion board, complete with exaggerated voices and gestures that had Diesel nearly choking on his sandwich with laughter. Even some of the personnel at nearby tables had started paying attention to the impromptu performance. And then Hollywood continued, affecting the pompous tone of a senior officer. "The board chairperson looks at my evaluation and says, 'Lieutenant Commander Harrison, your record shows exceptional performance in all areas, but we're concerned about your tendency toward,' and I swear he paused for dramatic effect, excessive confidence in informal settings." The table erupted in laughter. Even Sarah cracked a smile, though Marcus noticed it didn't quite reach her eyes. Hollywood basked in the attention for a moment before continuing his story, but Marcus found himself studying Sarah more closely. There was something about her posture, the way she held her shoulders just slightly too rigid, that suggested she was working harder than the rest of them to appear relaxed. As the laughter died down, Hollywood turned to Sarah with the kind of mischievous grin that usually preceded his more questionable jokes. "Speaking of ranks and promotions," he said, "Mitchell, I've been meaning to ask you something. You know how we've all got our little specialties that got us noticed during training? Diesel here can breach any door known to man, Marcus can shoot the wings off a fly at 1,000 yards, and I'm devastatingly handsome." Another round of groans and thrown napkins greeted this statement, but Hollywood pressed on undeterred. "But you, Mitchell, you're like this mystery wrapped in an enigma wrapped in a security clearance. So I've got to ask, what's your secret? What made the brass decide that little old petty officer second-class Mitchell was SEAL material?" It was meant as a lighthearted question, the kind of gentle ribbing that was standard operating procedure among teammates. Hollywood's tone was friendly, his expression genuinely curious rather than mocking. In any normal circumstances, it would have elicited either a self-deprecating joke in response or maybe a brief, humble description of whatever skills or experience had brought Sarah to their unit. Instead, Sarah's fork paused halfway to her mouth, and, for just a moment, Marcus saw something flicker across her features. It was too quick to identify clearly, but it looked almost like pain. When she set down her fork and looked up at Hollywood. Her expression had shifted into something Marcus couldn't quite read. "You want to know what got me noticed?" Sarah asked quietly. Her voice carried an odd quality, as if she were testing the words before fully committing to them. "You really want to know what made the Navy decide that I belonged here with all of you?" Hollywood nodded enthusiastically, apparently oblivious to the subtle change in atmosphere that Marcus was beginning to sense. "Absolutely. I mean, we've all got our war stories about how we ended up wearing the trident. What's yours?" The cafeteria noise seemed to fade into background static as Sarah considered her answer. Marcus found himself leaning slightly forward, along with everyone else at the table. Even at the neighboring tables, conversations were winding down as people unconsciously tuned in to whatever was about to unfold. Sarah took a slow breath, and when she spoke again, her voice carried a weight that seemed to settle over the entire area like a heavy blanket. "Well," she said, her eyes meeting Hollywood's directly, "I suppose it started when I was 16 years old, and my stepfather decided that my little sister and I were getting too old for him to ignore anymore." The words hung in the air like smoke from an explosion. Marcus felt his stomach drop as the implications began to sink in, but Sarah wasn't finished. Her voice remained steady, almost clinical, but there was an undercurrent of steel that made everyone within earshot pay attention. "See, our mother worked double shifts at the hospital, and she trusted him to take care of us while she was gone. She didn't know that taking care of us had started to mean something very different to him than it did to her. She didn't know about the visits to our bedroom after she left for work, or the special games he wanted us to play, or the promises he made about what would happen to our family if we ever told anyone. The silence that followed was so complete that Marcus could hear his own heartbeat. Hollywood's face had gone pale, and his mouth hung slightly open as if he wanted to say something, but couldn't find words. Diesel had set down his sandwich and was staring at Sarah with an expression of growing horror and understanding. Sarah continued, her voice never wavering, never becoming emotional, but carrying an authority that commanded absolute attention. "The thing is, I was the older sister. I was supposed to protect her. That was my job, even if I was just a kid myself. So when he started paying more attention to her, when I realized that he was getting ready to expand his interests, I had to do something." Marcus realized he was holding his breath. Around the cafeteria, other conversations had stopped entirely. It was as if Sarah's words had created a bubble of frozen time where nothing existed except her story and the people listening to it. "I spent 3 months planning," Sarah continued. 3 months watching his patterns, learning his habits, figuring out how to protect my sister without destroying what was left of our family. I was 16, but I was thinking like a soldier even though I didn't know that's what it was called yet. I was conducting surveillance, gathering intelligence, developing a tactical plan. She paused for just a moment, and Marcus saw her hands, which had been perfectly steady throughout her recitation, tremble almost imperceptibly. But when she continued, her voice remained rock solid. "The opportunity came on a Tuesday night in November. Mom was working a double at the hospital, wouldn't be home until 0800 the next morning. He'd been drinking, which was normal, but this time he'd had enough to make him careless, but not enough to make him pass out. He went into my sister's room around 2,200 hours. The clinical precision of her language stood in stark contrast to the emotional weight of what she was describing, and Marcus realized that this was how she'd learned to cope with the memory. By treating it like a mission report, she could distance herself enough to function. I gave him 15 minutes to get comfortable, to think he was safe and unobserved. Then I went in after him." The pause that followed seemed to stretch for eternity. When Sarah spoke again, her voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but somehow everyone in the immediate area heard every word. "I had my stepfather's own baseball bat. Aluminum, regulation size, perfect weight and balance. I'd practice with it in the garage when no one was home, learning how to swing it for maximum impact. When I walked into that room and saw him," she stopped, closing her eyes for just a moment. "When I saw what he was doing to my little sister, I didn't hesitate." Marcus felt something cold settle in his chest. This wasn't just a story about childhood trauma. This was something else entirely. The first swing caught him across the shoulders as he was turning around. knocked him off the bed and onto the floor. He was bigger than me, stronger than me, but he was drunk and surprised, and I had the advantage of superior positioning and preparation. The second swing was to his ribs. I heard at least two of them crack. The clinical detachment in her voice was almost more unsettling than if she'd been emotional. Marcus found himself studying her face, looking for some sign of how this memory affected her, but her expression remained carefully controlled. He tried to get up, tried to reach for me, but I'd anticipated that. The third swing was to his left knee, specifically targeting the lateral collateral ligament. In civilian terms, that's the ligament that keeps your kneecap from moving sideways. When you damage it severely enough, walking becomes problematic. Hollywood made a small sound that might have been a gasp, or might have been something else entirely. Sarah's eyes flicked to him for just a moment before continuing. At that point, he wasn't really a threat anymore, but I wasn't taking chances. I told him exactly what was going to happen next. I explained that if he ever touched my sister again, if he ever even looked at her in a way that made me uncomfortable, if he ever did anything that made me think he was considering resuming his previous activities, I would finish what I'd started that night. And I explained in very specific, very detailed terms exactly what finishing it would entail. The silence in the cafeteria had become so profound that Marcus was certain everyone could hear the ventilation system humming overhead. Sarah picked up her water bottle and took a small sip, as casual as if she were discussing the weather. He never touched either of us again. In fact, he moved out 2 weeks later and never came back. Told our mother that he'd realized he wasn't ready for the responsibility of family. She was heartbroken, but my sister and I... Sarah's expression softened almost imperceptibly. My sister and I were finally safe. Marcus found his voice, though it came out rougher than he'd intended. Sarah, how did this lead to you becoming a SEAL? She looked at him with something that might have been appreciation for the question. The investigating officer who responded to the incident was a Navy recruiter on reserve duty. He'd seen the aftermath, talked to the witnesses, read the medical reports. When he interviewed me, he said something I'll never forget. Sarah's posture straightened slightly, and for the first time since she'd started speaking, Marcus caught a glimpse of something that might have been pride in her expression. He said, "Young lady, what you did took tactical thinking, physical courage, and moral conviction. You identified a threat, developed a plan to neutralize it, and executed that plan under extreme stress. Those are exactly the qualities the Navy is looking for in its special operations personnel. When you turn 18, if you're interested, I'd like to talk to you about serving your country." The implications of what she was saying began to sink in around the table. This wasn't just a story about surviving childhood trauma. This was about how that trauma had forged someone with the exact mindset and capabilities that made for an exceptional special operations warrior. "So that's what I did," Sarah continued. "On my 18th birthday, I walked into that recruiting office and signed up, went through basic training, advanced individual training, then applied for SEAL training. Made it through BUD/S, advanced tactical training, specialized schools. Every step of the way, instructors kept asking me where I'd learned to think tactically under pressure, where I'd developed my tolerance for stress, how I'd learned to compartmentalize emotion during crisis situations." She gestured slightly, encompassing the table and everyone sitting around it. And every time, I gave them the standard answer: natural aptitude and good training. But the truth is, I learned everything I needed to know about warfare on a Tuesday night in November when I was 16 years old. I learned that sometimes the only way to protect the people you love is to be willing to do things that other people can't or won't do. I learned that fear is just information, and that the right mindset can turn anyone into a weapon. Marcus stared at her, trying to reconcile this revelation with the quiet, unassuming teammate he'd thought he knew. Every interaction they'd had over the past 6 months was taking on new meaning. Her uncanny ability to remain calm under pressure during training exercises. Her instinctive understanding of tactical scenarios. The way she seemed to anticipate threats before they fully materialized. Hollywood finally found his voice, though it sounded strained. "Sarah, Jesus, I was just making a joke about ranks and promotions. I had no idea. Sarah turned to him with an expression that was kind but firm. You asked what got me noticed? What made the brass think I was SEAL material? The answer is that I'd already proven I could function as an effective operator under the worst possible circumstances. I'd already demonstrated that I could make hard choices and live with the consequences. Everything else was just learning the technical skills and adapting them to military applications. She picked up her fork again and took another bite of her salad, as if she'd just finished discussing weekend plans rather than revealing one of the most profound and disturbing backstories Marcus had ever heard. But he could see now what he'd missed before: the constant vigilance in her posture, the way she positioned herself to maintain visual contact with all potential entrances to any room, the careful control she maintained over every aspect of her presentation. The silence stretched on as everyone at the table processed what they'd just heard. Marcus found himself looking at his teammates with new eyes as well. How many of them were carrying similar stories? How many had paths to the teams that involved more than just athletic ability and patriotic duty? Finally, Diesel cleared his throat. When he spoke, his voice was unusually gentle for someone of his imposing size. Your sister, is she okay? I mean, after everything. Sarah's expression softened again, and for the first time since she'd started her story, Marcus saw genuine emotion cross her features. She's amazing. She's a pediatric nurse now, works with children who've experienced trauma. She says I inspired her to find ways to help protect kids who can't protect themselves. She doesn't blame me for what happened, and she doesn't blame herself either. We both learned that sometimes bad things happen, but that doesn't mean you have to let them define who you become. Marcus felt something shift in his understanding, not just of Sarah, but of the entire concept of what made someone suited for special operations. He'd always thought of SEAL training as a way to forge ordinary people into extraordinary warriors. But maybe it was more complicated than that. Maybe some people arrived already forged by circumstances that no training program could replicate. The cafeteria around them was slowly returning to normal conversation levels. But Marcus noticed that several nearby tables were still quiet, their occupants clearly having overheard at least part of Sarah's story. Word would spread, as it always did in tight military communities, but Marcus suspected it would spread with respect rather than gossip. Hollywood was studying his hands, apparently still processing his role in triggering this revelation. Sarah, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. Don't apologize, Sarah interrupted. You asked an honest question, and I gave you an honest answer. This isn't something I'm ashamed of. It's part of who I am, part of what makes me effective at what we do. You want to know why I can keep my head clear when everything goes to hell? Why I don't freeze up when things get violent? It's because I learned a long time ago that sometimes violence is the only language that certain people understand, and if you're not fluent in that language, you can't protect the people who matter. Marcus found himself nodding slowly. It made sense in a way that was both inspiring and deeply troubling. The military attracted people who wanted to serve something larger than themselves, but it also attracted people who'd learned hard lessons about the nature of conflict and the necessity of being prepared to fight. There's something else, Sarah continued, her voice taking on a slightly different tone. Something I think you should know if we're going to keep working together. She looked around the table, making eye contact with each of them before continuing. The reason my background is classified isn't just because of privacy concerns. After I finished SEAL training, I was selected for specialized assignment with a joint task force that, well, let's just say we focused on a very specific type of target. Individuals who use their power and position to exploit vulnerable people, particularly children. The pieces were clicking into place for Marcus now. Sarah wasn't just a SEAL who'd overcome a traumatic childhood. She was a SEAL who'd turned that childhood into a highly specialized skill set for hunting predators. Over the past 4 years, before being assigned to this unit, I participated in 17 operations targeting human trafficking networks, child exploitation rings, and similar threats. My role was usually intelligence gathering and psychological assessment, but sometimes, she paused, choosing her words carefully. Sometimes the mission required someone who could get close to targets without triggering their defensive instincts. Someone who understood how predators think, how they operate, how they choose, and groom their victims. Marcus realized he was staring at her with something approaching awe. The quiet, unassuming teammate they'd known for 6 months was actually one of the most specialized and experienced operators any of them had ever worked with. 17 successful operations, Sarah continued. Over 300 victims recovered. 47 perpetrators either eliminated or delivered to appropriate authorities for prosecution. And every single mission, I thought about that Tuesday night in November and my little sister's face when she realized she was finally safe. The weight of what she was telling them settled over the table like a physical presence. Marcus understood now why her service record was classified, why she'd appeared without the usual background briefings and integration processes. She wasn't just another team member. She was a strategic asset with capabilities that couldn't be replicated through conventional training. Hollywood shook his head slowly. And here I thought I was hot stuff because I could fast rope from a helicopter without getting tangled up. Despite everything, Sarah actually smiled at that. It was the first genuine, unguarded expression Marcus had seen from her since she'd started talking. Fast roping is important too, she said. Every skill has its place. The point isn't to compare backgrounds or experiences. The point is to understand that we all bring different strengths to the team, and sometimes those strengths come from places you wouldn't expect. Marcus looked around the table at his teammates, seeing them all with fresh eyes. Diesel's protective instincts and loyalty, Hollywood's ability to lighten the mood and maintain morale under pressure, his own precision and attention to detail, and now Sarah's unique understanding of human predators and her unshakable commitment to protecting the innocent. As if reading his thoughts, Sarah continued. This team, this unit, it's the first assignment I've had where I get to work with people instead of just hunting monsters. It's the first time in 4 years that I've been part of something that builds things up instead of just tearing them down. That matters to me more than you know. The emotional weight in her voice was unmistakable now, and Marcus realized that her revelation had been about more than just answering Hollywood's question. It had been about trust, about choosing to be vulnerable with people she decided were worth that risk. So when you asked what got me noticed, Sarah said, turning back to Hollywood, the answer is that I learned to be a predator in order to protect prey. I learned to think like the enemy in order to defeat the enemy. And I learned that sometimes the most important battles are the ones that never make it into official reports or commendation ceremonies. She stood up, gathering her tray and utensils. I should get going. We've got equipment check in 30 minutes, and I want to review the technical specifications on the new comm gear before the briefing. As she turned to leave, Marcus found himself speaking without really planning to. Sarah, she paused and looked back at him. Thank you for trusting us with this. And for everything else, everything you've done, everything you've been through. Thank you. She nodded once, a small gesture that somehow conveyed both acknowledgement and dismissal of the gratitude. We're teammates, she said simply. That's what teammates do. They trust each other with the truth. As she walked away, Marcus watched her go with a mixture of admiration, respect, and something approaching awe. The cafeteria was returning to its normal rhythm of conversation and activity, but he knew that nothing would ever be quite the same. Not just because of what Sarah had told them, but because of what it revealed about the hidden depths that existed within every person who chose to serve. Hollywood finally spoke, his voice subdued. I feel like an ass. Don't, Diesel rumbled. She's right. You asked an honest question. And now we know who we're really working with. Marcus nodded, still processing everything they'd learned. The question is, what do we do with this information? We do our jobs, Diesel said firmly. We watch her back, just like she watches ours. And maybe we remember that everybody's got a story, and some stories are heavier than others. As Marcus finished his lunch and prepared to return to duty, he found himself thinking about the nature of strength and courage. He'd always defined those qualities in terms of physical capability and mental toughness under fire. But Sarah had shown him something different. The strength to survive unthinkable circumstances and transform that survival into a weapon for protecting others. The courage to trust teammates with the most vulnerable parts of your history. The upcoming equipment checks suddenly seemed like the most normal thing in the world, a welcome return to the familiar routines of military life. But Marcus knew that he'd never look at those routines or his teammates quite the same way again. In the distance, he could see Sarah entering the equipment bay, already focused on the next task, the next mission, the next opportunity to serve something larger than herself. And for the first time since he'd known her, Marcus truly understood what he was looking at. Not just a highly trained operator, but a warrior forged in the most personal and unforgiving crucible imaginable. The story was far from over. The afternoon sun streamed through the high windows of Equipment Bay 7, casting long shadows across rows of tactical gear arranged with military precision. Marcus Rodriguez found himself moving through the familiar routine of weapons inspection with uncharacteristic distraction, his mind still processing the revelations from lunch. Around him, his teammates conducted their own equipment checks with a methodical thoroughness that had become second nature, but the atmosphere felt different somehow. Sarah Mitchell worked at a station 3 positions down from Marcus, her movements as efficient and precise as always. But now Marcus found himself noticing details that had escaped his attention before. The way she positioned herself to maintain awareness of everyone else in the bay, the slightly defensive curve to her shoulders that he'd previously attributed to standard military bearing, the careful control she maintained over every gesture and expression. Lieutenant Commander Jake Hollywood Harrison was uncharacteristically quiet as he field-stripped his sidearm, his usual stream of commentary replaced by focused concentration. Every few minutes, his eyes would drift towards Sarah's station before quickly returning to his work. Marcus could practically see him wrestling with the weight of what he'd accidentally uncovered with his casual question about ranks and specialties. Petty Officer First Class Tony Diesel Kowalski handled his equipment with his typical methodical precision, but Marcus noticed that the big man's attention kept wandering to Sarah as well. Unlike Hollywood's obvious discomfort, Diesel seemed to be studying her with a new kind of respect, as if he were recalibrating his entire understanding of their team dynamics. The equipment check proceeded in relative silence, broken only by the mechanical sounds of weapons being disassembled, inspected, and reassembled. The rhythm was soothing in its familiarity, a return to the concrete, measurable world of military procedure after the emotional complexity of Sarah's revelation. Marcus found comfort in the weight of his rifle, the satisfying click of components fitting together properly, the simple satisfaction of ensuring that every piece of gear was ready for whatever mission lay ahead. But even as his hands went through the motions of inspection and maintenance, his mind kept returning to the cafeteria conversation. The clinical precision with which Sarah had described defending her sister. The way she transformed personal trauma into professional capability. The casual mention of 17 successful operations against human trafficking networks, as if that were just another line on a standard service record. Marcus had been part of the special operations community for over 8 years, and he'd worked alongside some of the most elite warriors in the world. But he'd never encountered anyone quite like Sarah Mitchell. Most operators came to the teams through conventional military channels. High school athletics, college RDC programs, or direct enlistment, followed by successful completion of BUD/S training. Their backgrounds typically involved some combination of patriotic duty, adventure-seeking, and the desire to serve alongside the best of the best. Sarah's path had been fundamentally different. She hadn't chosen special operations as much as special operations had chosen her, recognizing capabilities that had been forged in circumstances no training program could replicate. The recruiting officer who'd first identified her potential had been looking at someone who'd already demonstrated the core qualities that made for effective special operations work: tactical thinking under extreme stress, the ability to compartmentalize emotion during crisis situations, and the moral conviction to take difficult action when necessary. As Marcus cleaned the bolt carrier group of his rifle, he found himself wondering about the other members of their unit, the teammates who weren't present for the equipment check. How many of them carried similar stories? How many had paths to the teams that involved more than just athletic ability and desire to serve? The question bothered him more than it probably should have. Marcus had always prided himself on being a good judge of character, on understanding the people he served alongside. But Sarah's revelation had highlighted how much he didn't know about the inner lives of his teammates, how many assumptions he'd made based on surface observations and standard military biographies. Rodriguez, the voice of Master Chief Petty Officer William Gunny Patterson, cut through Marcus's introspection. The senior enlisted advisor for their unit had entered the equipment bay without Marcus noticing, a fact that would have embarrassed him under normal circumstances. "Yes, Master Chief." Marcus set down his rifle and turned to give Patterson his full attention. "Conference room, 15 minutes. Bring Mitchell, Harrison, and Kowalski. We've got mission planning to discuss." Patterson's weathered face revealed nothing about the nature of the upcoming briefing, but Marcus had worked with the Master Chief long enough to recognize the subtle tension in his posture that suggested something significant was developing. "Understood, Master Chief. Any specific equipment requirements for the briefing?" Patterson's eyes flicked briefly towards Sarah's position before returning to Marcus. "Standard planning materials. This one's still in the preliminary stages, but it's got some unique operational requirements that I think will interest the team." As the Master Chief departed, Marcus felt a familiar stirring of anticipation. Mission planning sessions were where all their training and preparation coalesced into concrete action, where abstract capabilities became specific plans for accomplishing strategic objectives. It was the aspect of military service that he found most satisfying, the intellectual challenge of translating high-level goals into detailed operational procedures. "Mitchell, Harrison, Kowalski," Marcus called out. "Mission planning in the conference room, 15 minutes. His teammates acknowledged the notification with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Hollywood immediately began securing his equipment, his professional focus overriding whatever personal discomfort he might still be feeling. Diesel simply nodded and continued his methodical cleaning routine, but Marcus noticed that he accelerated his pace slightly. Sarah showed no reaction beyond a brief acknowledgement, but Marcus caught her making a subtle adjustment to her equipment loadout, selecting specific items that suggested she anticipated extended planning sessions. The conference room adjacent to Equipment Bay 7 had been the site of countless briefings over the years, its walls lined with maps, communication equipment, and whiteboards covered in tactical diagrams. A large table dominated the center of the space, surrounded by chairs that had been worn smooth by years of use. The room smelled faintly of coffee, dry erase markers, and the particular combination of cleaning solvents and gun oil that permeated every space in the special operations community. Marcus arrived first, claiming his usual seat with a clear view of both the main entrance and the secondary exit that led to the communication center. It was a habit developed over years of security briefings, where situational awareness remained important even in supposedly secure facilities. Hollywood and Diesel entered together, their conversation dying as they took their seats. Sarah arrived precisely on time, carrying a small notebook and tactical pen that Marcus had never noticed before. Master Chief Patterson entered with Lieutenant Commander Rebecca "Ice" Thompson, the unit's intelligence officer. Thompson was a compact woman in her early 30s whose analytical mind had earned her the nickname through her ability to remain completely calm while delivering even the most disturbing intelligence assessments. She carried a thick folder marked with classification indicators that immediately commanded everyone's attention. "Gentlemen, Mitchell," Patterson began, his formal tone indicating that the casual atmosphere of equipment maintenance had given way to official business. "What I'm about to brief you on is compartmented information, classification level secret with special access required. Everyone in this room has the necessary clearances, but I'm obligated to remind you that discussion of this material outside secure facilities is prohibited." Marcus straightened in his chair, his attention focusing with the sharp clarity that came from years of handling classified information. Around the table, his teammates exhibited similar shifts in posture and attention. Even Sarah, who'd maintained careful control throughout the emotional revelations of lunch, seemed to sharpen her focus as she prepared to receive mission-critical information. Lieutenant Commander Thompson opened her folder and withdrew several photographs, spreading them across the table where everyone could see. The images showed what appeared to be a luxury resort complex, pristine beaches, expensive architecture, and recreational facilities that spoke of wealth and exclusivity. This is the Emerald Coast Resort, located on a private island approximately 40 nautical miles off the coast of Colombia. Thompson began, her voice carrying the crisp precision that Marcus had come to associate with intelligence briefings. On the surface, it operates as an exclusive retreat for wealthy international clients, offering privacy and luxury accommodations away from public scrutiny. She placed additional photographs on the table, these showing the resort from different angles and at various times of day. Marcus studied the images, automatically noting potential approach routes, defensive positions, and tactical challenges that the location would present. What makes this location significant, Thompson continued, is intelligence indicating that it serves a secondary function as a hub for international human trafficking operations, specifically focused on the exploitation of minors. Our sources suggest that certain guests at the resort are not there for conventional vacation activities. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach as the implications became clear. This wasn't going to be a conventional military operation. The mention of human trafficking and child exploitation meant they were looking at something that fell into the gray area between military action and law enforcement, the kind of mission that required specialized skills and psychological preparation. He glanced towards Sarah and saw that she was studying the photographs with an intensity that went beyond professional interest. Her expression remained carefully controlled, but Marcus could see subtle changes in her posture that suggested the briefing was resonating with her in ways that had nothing to do with tactical considerations. The Colombian government has provided tacit approval for American intervention, but they want complete deniability, Thompson explained. Official channels are compromised due to corruption concerns at multiple levels of their law enforcement and military hierarchy. This has to be a surgical operation. Get in, gather intelligence, extract any victims, neutralize key targets, and get out without leaving evidence of American involvement. Master Chief Patterson leaned forward, his weathered hands clasped in front of him. The reason this mission has been assigned to our unit specifically is that intelligence indicates the resort security is provided by former special operations personnel from various countries. We're not dealing with conventional criminal organizations here. These people have military training and experience. Marcus nodded, understanding the implications. Former special operations personnel presented tactical challenges that went far beyond what conventional law enforcement or even military units typically encountered. They would have training in counter-surveillance, advanced weapons handling, and tactical thinking. Approaching them required operators who could match their skills while maintaining the element of surprise. Time frame for the operation is approximately 6 weeks, Patterson continued. That gives us time for detailed planning, specialized training, and final intelligence gathering. But I want to be clear about something. This mission is voluntary. Anyone who doesn't feel comfortable with the operational requirements can request reassignment without prejudice to their career or standing in the unit. The offer of voluntary participation was standard procedure for certain types of missions, but Marcus had never actually seen anyone exercise that option. Special operations personnel were selected and trained specifically for difficult assignments, and the culture of the community emphasized commitment to whatever mission was assigned. Still, Marcus understood why Patterson was making the offer. Missions involving human trafficking and child exploitation carried emotional and psychological burdens that went beyond conventional combat operations. Even the most experienced operators could find themselves affected in unexpected ways when confronted with evidence of systematic abuse and exploitation. Hollywood was the first to respond, his voice carrying none of his usual humor. What kind of timeline are we looking at for planning and preparation? Thompson consulted her folder. Initial reconnaissance and intelligence gathering will begin immediately. Detailed mission planning starts next week, followed by specialized training focused on maritime insertion, close-quarters combat in civilian environments, and evidence collection procedures. Final operational approval is scheduled for 5 weeks from today. Marcus found himself studying the photographs again, this time focusing on the defensive challenges the location would present. The resort's island setting meant that insertion would require either maritime or aerial approaches, both of which carried significant risks of detection. The luxury facilities suggested sophisticated security systems, while the involvement of former special operations personnel indicated human threats with advanced tactical capabilities. What's our intelligence picture regarding the number of potential victims? Diesel asked, his normally jovial demeanor replaced by grim focus. Thompson's expression tightened slightly. Preliminary estimates suggest between 12 and 20 minors at any given time, ages ranging from approximately 10 to 16. They're rotated through the facility on a regular basis, which suggests a larger network that extends beyond this single location. The numbers hit Marcus like a physical blow. 20 children trapped in circumstances that he could barely allow himself to imagine, depending on his team's ability to plan and execute a successful rescue operation. The weight of responsibility was enormous, but it was also clarifying. This was exactly why he joined the Navy SEALs. To protect people who couldn't protect themselves, to stand between innocence and evil, to ensure that monsters like the ones operating this resort face consequences for their actions. He looked around the table at his teammates and saw similar expressions of grim determination. Whatever personal issues or interpersonal dynamics they might be dealing with, the mission took precedence. 20 children needed them to be better than perfect, and failure wasn't an option that any of them would consider. Sarah spoke for the first time since the briefing began, her voice quiet but carrying an unmistakable edge. Do we have any information about the selection criteria for victims? How they're acquired? What makes them valuable to this particular network? Thompson nodded approvingly at the question. Intelligence suggests they target children from economically disadvantaged backgrounds, particularly those without strong family support systems. The operation appears to function through a network of recruiters who promise legitimate opportunities, modeling contracts, educational programs, even basic employment. Once the children are isolated and transported to the facility, they're essentially held captive. Marcus noticed that Sarah's hands had formed fists while Thompson was speaking, though her expression remained professionally neutral. The question had been tactically sound, focused on understanding the enemy's operational methods. But Marcus suspected it also had personal resonance for someone who'd spent years hunting similar predators. Rules of engagement? Hollywood asked. Master Chief Patterson's expression became even more serious. This is where things get complicated. Officially, we're conducting a reconnaissance mission to gather intelligence for potential future action by Colombian authorities. Unofficially, we have broad discretion to take whatever action is necessary to protect innocent life and neutralize immediate threats. Marcus understood the careful language. They were being given permission to use lethal force if necessary, but the official record would need to support alternative explanations for any casualties that resulted. It was the kind of mission that required careful documentation and precise tactical decisions. What about extraction procedures for recovered victims? Marcus asked. Medical and psychological support teams will be standing by at a classified location, Thompson replied. Our job is to get them out of the immediate threat environment. Specialists will handle everything that comes after that. The briefing continued for another 30 minutes, covering logistics, communication protocols, and preliminary mission timelines. But Marcus found his attention increasingly drawn to Sarah's reactions to specific pieces of information. She asked precise, tactically relevant questions about security protocols, guard rotations, and facility layout. But whenever the conversation turned to details about the victims themselves, he noticed subtle changes in her posture and breathing that suggested the information was affecting her more deeply than she was letting on. As the formal briefing concluded and everyone began gathering their materials, Master Chief Patterson made an unexpected announcement. One more thing. Given the specialized nature of this operation, I'm designating Mitchell as the team's primary liaison for victim recovery and evidence collection. Her background includes extensive experience with these types of cases, and she's received specialized training in trauma-informed interaction protocols. Marcus felt pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. Sarah's classified service record, her experience with 17 successful operations against trafficking networks, the way she'd approached every aspect of their training with such precise tactical thinking. She wasn't just a team member who happened to have relevant experience. She was a specialist whose entire career had been building toward missions exactly like this one. Hollywood looked surprised, but not objected. Does that mean she'll be taking lead on certain aspects of the operation? Patterson nodded. Tactical command remains with the usual chain, but Mitchell will have operational authority over anything related to victim safety and evidence preservation. Her recommendations carry the same weight as my own in those areas. As the meeting broke up and everyone prepared to return to their regular duties, Marcus lingered in the conference room. He wanted to process what they just learned to begin the mental preparation that would be necessary for such a complex and emotionally challenging mission. Sarah was gathering her materials with characteristic efficiency, but Marcus could see that she was also taking extra time to study the photographs of the resort. Her expression was thoughtful, analytical, but there was something else there that he was beginning to recognize. Personal investment that went beyond professional duty. "Mitchell," he said as she prepared to leave. She looked up from the photographs, her expression questioning. "This mission, given your background, your experience with similar operations, how are you feeling about it?" For a moment, Sarah's carefully controlled expression softened slightly. "Honestly, this is exactly the kind of work I joined the Navy to do. Protecting children from predators, disrupting networks that profit from exploitation, ensuring that monsters face consequences for their actions. It's what gets me up in the morning." Marcus nodded, understanding more than she probably realized. "And the fact that we're talking about 20 kids who are depending on us to get this right?" Sarah's expression hardened with determination. 20 kids who've been failed by every system that was supposed to protect them. 20 kids who are trapped in a nightmare that most people can't even imagine. 20 kids who deserve to know that someone, somewhere, gives a damn about their lives and their suffering. She gathered her materials and stood to leave, but paused at the doorway. "Marcus, I know this mission is going to challenge all of us in different ways, but I want you to know that I've never worked with a team I trust more completely. Whatever this operation requires, whatever sacrifices we need to make, I know we're going to bring those children home." As she left, Marcus remained in the conference room, studying the photographs of the Emerald Coast Resort. Somewhere in those pristine buildings, behind those luxury facades, 20 children were waiting for rescue. They didn't know it yet, but their salvation was being planned by some of the most capable warriors in the world, led by someone who understood their suffering on the most personal level imaginable. The mission was still weeks away, but Marcus could feel the familiar focus settling over him like armor. Personal concerns, interpersonal dynamics, even the emotional weight of what they'd learned about Sarah that afternoon. Everything was being subordinated to the single most important objective, bringing those children home safely. In 6 weeks, they would find out if their training, their planning, and their determination were enough. 20 young lives hung in the balance, and failure was not an option that any of them would consider. The real work was just beginning. The tactical training facility at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado hummed with activity as the early morning fog rolled in from the Pacific Ocean. Marcus Rodriguez adjusted the night vision goggles mounted on his helmet, testing the focus and clarity while his teammates conducted similar equipment checks around him. 3 weeks had passed since the initial mission briefing, and the specialized training for Operation Neptune's Shield had reached its most intensive phase. The past 21 days had transformed their understanding of what the Emerald Coast Resort mission would require. What had initially appeared to be a complex, but straightforward rescue operation had revealed layers of operational difficulty that pushed even their elite capabilities to the limit. The resort's security systems were more sophisticated than initial intelligence had suggested. The guard force was larger and better trained than anticipated, and the facility's layout presented tactical challenges that required innovative solutions. Sarah Mitchell moved through her equipment check with the same methodical precision she brought to every aspect of their training, but Marcus had learned to read the subtle signs that indicated her internal state. Today, like every day for the past 3 weeks, she carried herself with the focused intensity of someone preparing for the most important mission of her career. The specialized training had revealed aspects of her capabilities that even Marcus hadn't fully understood before, demonstrating skills and knowledge that went far beyond conventional SEAL training. During the close-quarters combat scenarios that simulated the resort's interior spaces, Sarah had displayed an almost supernatural ability to navigate complex environments while maintaining awareness of potential victim locations. She moved through rooms differently than the rest of them, her eyes constantly scanning for signs of concealment, hidden passages, or spaces where frightened children might be hiding. It wasn't just tactical awareness, it was the kind of specialized perception that came from years of hunting human predators. Lieutenant Commander Jake Hollywood Harrison had thrown himself into the mission preparation with an intensity that surprised Marcus. The usually lighthearted officer had become almost obsessively focused on mastering every aspect of the operational plan, as if he were personally responsible for ensuring that nothing went wrong. His jokes and casual banter had largely disappeared, replaced by the kind of grim determination that Marcus associated with operators who'd seen too much combat. During their maritime insertion training, Hollywood had pushed himself harder than anyone else, practicing the complex approach maneuvers until he could execute them perfectly even under the most challenging conditions. When Marcus had asked him about his dedication, Hollywood had simply said, 20 kids are counting on us to be perfect. I'm not going to be the weak link that gets them killed. Petty Officer First Class Tony Diesel Kowalski had surprised everyone by revealing an unexpected aptitude for the psychological aspects of victim recovery. During training scenarios with volunteer actors playing traumatized children, Diesel's imposing physical presence somehow became reassuring rather than intimidating. He had a way of speaking to frightened people that conveyed absolute safety and protection, his deep voice becoming gentle and calm in ways that seemed to come from personal experience. When Sarah had complimented him on his natural ability to connect with trauma victims, Diesel had quietly mentioned that he'd grown up in a household where his father's alcoholism had created an environment of unpredictable violence. You learn to recognize when someone's terrified, he'd said, and you learn how to make them feel safe without making any sudden moves or loud noises. Master Chief Petty Officer William Gunny Patterson had been relentless in his preparation, driving the team through increasingly complex training scenarios that tested not just their tactical skills, but their ability to maintain mission focus while confronted with simulated evidence of systematic abuse. The psychological preparation had been as important as the tactical training, ensuring that they could function effectively even when confronted with sights and situations that would overwhelm most people. The training facility's mock-up of the resort's main building was an impressive feat of engineering, constructed with movable walls and modular furniture that allowed the instructors to reconfigure the layout for different scenarios. Over the past week, Marcus and his teammates had run through dozens of variations, practicing their approach routes, room clearing procedures, and victim extraction protocols until they could execute them flawlessly even under stress. But today's exercise was different. Instead of the carefully controlled training scenarios they'd been running, today they would face what the instructors called a stress inoculation drill, a simulation designed to push them beyond their comfort zones and test their ability to maintain operational effectiveness when confronted with the kind of psychological trauma they would encounter during the actual mission. Lieutenant Commander Rebecca Ice Thompson emerged from the facility's command center carrying a tablet computer and wearing the kind of expression that indicated the morning's training would be particularly challenging. Behind her, several instructors wheeled equipment carts containing what appeared to be audiovisual equipment and props that Marcus couldn't immediately identify. Team meeting, Patterson called out, his voice carrying across the training area. Marcus and his teammates gathered in a loose circle around the Master Chief, automatically spacing themselves to maintain situational awareness while focusing on the briefing. Today's exercise is going to be different from anything we've done before, Patterson began. The instructors have prepared a scenario that's designed to replicate not just the tactical challenges of the actual mission, but the psychological and emotional stresses you'll face when confronted with evidence of systematic abuse. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. He'd been dreading this aspect of their preparation, the moment when they would have to confront simulated versions of what they would encounter during the actual rescue operation. The tactical challenges were manageable because they could be addressed through training and preparation. The emotional challenges were more difficult because they required confronting the human capacity for evil in its most concentrated form. Thompson consulted her tablet before continuing the briefing. The scenario involves a facility containing multiple victims in various states of physical and psychological trauma. Some will be cooperative with rescue efforts. Others will be too frightened to trust anyone, and some may actively resist extraction attempts due to psychological conditioning. She paused, making eye contact with each team member to ensure they understood the gravity of what she was describing. The actors participating in this exercise are professional performers who specialize in trauma education for law enforcement and military personnel. They've been trained to portray realistic reactions without causing actual psychological harm to participants. However, I want to be clear that what you're going to experience today will be emotionally challenging in ways that conventional military training doesn't prepare you for. Marcus glanced at Sarah and saw that she was listening to the briefing with the kind of focused intensity that suggested she was mentally preparing herself for something she knew would be difficult. Her experience with 17 previous operations against trafficking networks meant she had direct knowledge of what they were about to simulate, but Marcus suspected that didn't make it any easier to face. Rules of engagement for this exercise, Patterson continued, mirror what we expect during the actual operation. Your primary objective is victim recovery and extraction. Secondary objectives include neutralizing threats and gathering intelligence. But I want to emphasize that victim safety takes precedence over everything else, including your own safety. The weight of that statement settled over the group. In conventional military operations, mission accomplishment was typically the highest priority, with force protection being a close second. But this mission inverted those priorities, requiring them to accept additional personal risk in order to ensure that innocent civilians remained unharmed. Questions before we begin? Patterson asked. Diesel raised his hand. Are we going to have real-time communication with the command center during the exercise, or are we operating independently? Limited communication, Thompson replied. You'll have emergency channels available, but the exercise is designed to simulate the isolation you'll experience during the actual mission. Once you're inside the facility, you'll be largely on your own until extraction. Hollywood shifted uncomfortably. What about medical support if someone gets overwhelmed by the scenario? Patterson's expression softened slightly. Medical and psychological support personnel are standing by throughout the exercise. If anyone needs to stop for any reason, the safety word is Sierra. Say it once, and the exercise stops immediately. No questions asked, no impact on your participation in the actual mission. Marcus appreciated the precaution, but he also understood that none of them would use the safety word unless absolutely necessary. The culture of special operations emphasized mental toughness and the ability to function under extreme stress. Admitting that a training scenario was too emotionally challenging would be seen as a sign of weakness, regardless of official assurances to the contrary. One more thing, Patterson said, his tone becoming even more serious. Mitchell, given your specialized experience, you'll be taking tactical lead on victim interactions. The rest of the team will follow your guidance when it comes to approaching and communicating with the simulated victims. Sarah nodded, her expression revealing nothing about how she felt about the additional responsibility. But Marcus noticed that her posture had shifted slightly, taking on the alertness and focus that he'd learned to associate with her operational mindset. The team spent the next 30 minutes conducting final equipment checks and reviewing their operational plan. The exercise scenario called for a dawn raid on the simulated facility, with maritime insertion followed by coordinated assault on multiple entry points. Once inside, they would need to locate and extract an unknown number of victims while neutralizing security forces and gathering intelligence about the larger trafficking network. As they moved toward the training facility's staging area, Marcus found himself walking beside Sarah. She'd been unusually quiet during the final preparations, and he could sense the tension radiating from her despite her controlled exterior. You okay? He asked quietly, ensuring that his question wouldn't be overheard by the rest of the team. Sarah glanced at him, her expression thoughtful. "I've done this before, Marcus. Not the training simulation, but the real thing. I know what we're going to find in there, and I know how it's going to affect everyone." Marcus waited for her to continue, sensing that she needed to voice whatever was on her mind. "The thing about child victims," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper, "is that they've been conditioned to see adults as threats. Even when you're there to help them, even when you're risking your life to save them, they're terrified that you're just another predator. Some of them fight you because they think cooperation will make things worse. Others are so broken that they can't respond at all." Marcus felt something cold settle in his chest as the implications sank in. He'd been focused on the tactical challenges of the mission, the complexity of the insertion and extraction procedures, the technical aspects of neutralizing armed opposition. But Sarah was describing a different kind of challenge entirely. The emotional difficulty of rescuing people who might not understand that they were being rescued. "How do you handle it?" Marcus asked. "How do you stay focused on the mission when you're confronted with that kind of suffering?" Sarah's expression hardened with determination. "You remember that every minute you waste feeling sorry for yourself is another minute those children spend in hell. You remember that your job isn't to heal their trauma. Your job is to get them away from the people who are causing it. The healing comes later, with specialists who know how to help them. Your job is to be the weapon that stands between them and the monsters." As they approached the entry point for the training facility, Marcus realized that Sarah's perspective had been shaped by years of experience that none of the rest of them could fully understand. She'd learned to compartmentalize the emotional impact of what she witnessed in order to maintain operational effectiveness. But the cost of that compartmentalization was written in the careful control she maintained over every aspect of her behavior. The facility's interior had been configured to resemble a high-end residential building, with expensive furniture and decorative elements that created an atmosphere of luxury and comfort. But there were subtle details that suggested something more sinister. Locks on bedroom doors that could only be opened from the outside, security cameras positioned to monitor interior spaces, and windows that had been modified to prevent escape attempts. The team moved through their insertion sequence with practiced efficiency, each member executing their assigned role with the precision that came from weeks of preparation. Marcus felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that accompanied the transition from planning to action, his awareness sharpening as he focused on the immediate tactical situation. But as they penetrated deeper into the facility, the nature of the simulation began to reveal itself. The first indication was the sound of muffled crying coming from behind a locked door, followed by angry voices speaking in accented English about maintaining discipline and control. The audio was convincing enough that Marcus had to consciously remind himself that this was a training exercise, not an actual rescue operation. Sarah took point as they approached the first occupied room, her movements becoming even more controlled and deliberate. She signaled for the rest of the team to maintain overwatch positions while she approached the door, her weapon ready, but not immediately visible to anyone inside the room. The door opened to reveal a scene that hit Marcus like a physical blow despite his mental preparation. 3 young actors, convincingly portraying children between the ages of 12 and 15, huddled together in one corner of an otherwise luxurious bedroom. Their clothing was torn and dirty, their faces bore realistic makeup simulating bruises and injuries, and their eyes held the kind of fear that made Marcus's stomach turn even though he knew it was simulated. Sarah entered the room slowly, her weapon lowered but ready, her voice calm and reassuring as she began speaking to the frightened children. "My name is Sarah. I'm with the United States Navy, and I'm here to help you. You're safe now. No one is going to hurt you anymore." The reaction was immediate and devastating. One of the young actors began screaming, backing away from Sarah as if her presence represented a new threat rather than salvation. Another curled into a tight ball and began rocking back and forth, making sounds that were barely human. The third stared at Sarah with an expression of such profound hopelessness that Marcus had to look away. But Sarah didn't hesitate. She'd clearly encountered similar reactions before, and she responded with a combination of patience and authority that gradually began to penetrate the children's terror. She spoke to them in simple, clear language, explaining who she was and what was going to happen next. She showed them her military identification, allowed them to see her weapons and equipment, and, most importantly, she gave them choices about how they wanted to proceed. "I know you're scared," Sarah said, her voice carrying absolute conviction. "I know that adults have hurt you, and I know you don't have any reason to trust me. But I need you to listen to what I'm telling you. My friends and our soldiers, and our job is to fight bad people and protect good people. You are good people, and we are here to protect you." Gradually, incrementally, the children's terror began to give way to cautious hope. It was a process that required infinite patience and careful judgment, and Marcus found himself watching Sarah with a mixture of admiration and growing understanding. This wasn't just tactical skill. This was a form of specialized expertise that couldn't be taught in conventional training programs. The exercise continued for another 2 hours, with the team encountering increasingly complex scenarios that tested their ability to maintain operational effectiveness while dealing with traumatized victims, hostile security forces, and the psychological stress of witnessing simulated abuse. By the time they completed the final extraction sequence, Marcus felt emotionally drained in ways that combat operations had never achieved. During the post-exercise debrief, the instructors provided detailed feedback on tactical performance, communication procedures, and areas for improvement. But the conversation that mattered most took place later, when the team gathered privately to process what they'd experienced. "That was harder than I expected," Hollywood admitted, his usual confidence replaced by subdued reflection. "I thought I was prepared for it, but seeing those kids, even knowing it was simulation." Diesel nodded grimly. "The worst part was how they reacted to us, like we were another threat instead of help. I keep thinking about what the real children are going through right now, while we're sitting here talking about training exercises." Marcus looked at Sarah, who had been quietly listening to her teammates process their reactions. "How do you do it?" he asked. "How do you maintain focus when confronted with that level of suffering?" Sarah's expression was thoughtful as she considered her answer. "You learn to separate the mission from the emotion. During the operation, your job is to be a tactical asset focused on specific objectives. The emotional processing comes later when the victims are safe and you have time to deal with what you've seen." She paused, then continued with quiet intensity. "But you also learn to channel the emotion into motivation. Every time you see evidence of what these monsters do to innocent children, it reminds you why your mission matters. It reminds you that you're not just following orders or completing an assignment. You're standing between good and evil, and failure means that evil wins." As the team prepared to return to their regular duties, Marcus found himself thinking about the upcoming mission with a mixture of anticipation and dread. The tactical challenges were manageable because they could be addressed through preparation and training. But the emotional challenges would test them in ways that no amount of preparation could fully address. In 3 weeks, they would board aircraft that would take them to Colombia, where 20 real children waited in circumstances that were probably worse than anything the training simulation had shown them. The weight of that responsibility was enormous, but it was also clarifying. Marcus looked around at his teammates. Hollywood with his newfound determination, Diesel with his unexpected gentleness, and Sarah with her specialized understanding of human evil, and felt a surge of confidence. They weren't perfect, but they were as prepared as any team could be for what lay ahead. 20 children were depending on them to be better than perfect, and failure wasn't an option that any of them would consider. The mission was 3 weeks away, but Marcus knew they were ready for whatever it would demand. The hardest part would be the waiting. The pre-dawn darkness off the Colombian coast was absolute, broken only by the faint phosphorescence of the wake trailing behind the rigid-hull inflatable boat as it cut through the gentle swells of the Caribbean Sea. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Rodriguez checked his waterproof chronometer for the 3rd time in 5 minutes, confirming that they were exactly on schedule for their approach to the Emerald Coast Resort. Around him, his teammates conducted final equipment checks with a methodical precision that had become second nature during their intensive preparation. The 6 weeks of planning and training had culminated in this moment. Operation Neptune's Shield was no longer a theoretical exercise or training scenario, but a live mission with 20 real children depending on their success. The weight of that responsibility sat heavily on Marcus's shoulders as he reviewed the tactical timeline one final time, ensuring that every detail of their approach remained crystal clear in his mind. Sarah Mitchell crouched in the bow of the boat, her attention focused on the thermal imaging scope that would give them their first real-time view of the target facility. Her specialized equipment included sensors and detection devices that Marcus had never seen before, gear that spoke to the unique requirements of her role as the team's expert on human trafficking operations. In the weeks since their initial briefing, Marcus had gained new appreciation for the complexity of her background and the specialized skills she brought to their unit. Lieutenant Commander Jake Hollywood Harrison piloted the boat with the kind of focused concentration that had replaced his usual lighthearted demeanor since the mission preparation began. The transformation in Hollywood's personality had been one of the most striking aspects of their training period, as if the weight of the mission had burned away everything except his core competence as a special operations officer. He navigated by instruments and instinct, maintaining their course toward the target without the benefit of external navigation lights that might compromise their approach. Petty Officer First Class Tony Diesel Kowalski occupied the stern position, his massive frame somehow finding comfortable space in the cramped confines of the inflatable boat. His role in the mission would begin once they reached the facility itself, where his combination of intimidating presence and unexpected gentleness would be crucial for managing traumatized victims. The training scenarios had revealed aspects of Diesel's personality that surprised everyone, including the man himself. The island appeared as a darker shadow against the star-filled sky, its outline gradually becoming more distinct as they closed the final distance to their insertion point. Intelligence indicated that the resort's security forces conducted regular perimeter patrols, but their surveillance was focused primarily on the approaches visible from the main facility. The team's insertion point had been selected for its natural concealment and distance from the most heavily monitored areas. Master Chief Petty Officer William Gunny Patterson's voice came through their tactical communication system with characteristic calm authority. Neptune's Shield, this is Overwatch. You are cleared for final approach. Weather conditions remain optimal. No changes to target status. Proceed according to plan. Marcus acknowledged the transmission with a brief click of his radio, maintaining communication discipline while they remained in the most vulnerable phase of their approach. The next 30 minutes would determine whether 6 weeks of planning and preparation had been adequate for the challenges they were about to face. Sarah lowered her thermal imaging scope and turned toward the rest of the team, her expression visible in the faint green glow of their night vision equipment. Thermal signature confirms intelligence estimates. I'm reading approximately 15 heat sources in the main facility, with concentration in the eastern wing that matches our expected victim location. Security Patrol just completed its circuit of the north perimeter, which gives us a 12-minute window for insertion. The precision of her assessment reflected the specialized training she'd received for exactly these types of operations. During their preparation, Marcus had learned that Sarah's previous missions had involved similar tactical challenges, but the scale and complexity of the Emerald Coast operation exceeded anything she'd encountered before. Hollywood adjusted their approach angle slightly, compensating for the current and wind conditions that had developed since their initial departure from the staging area. Insertion point in sight. Depth finder shows adequate clearance for beach landing. No visible security presence at the target location. Marcus felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that accompanied the transition from planning to action, his awareness sharpening as they entered the final phase of their approach. Every detail of his equipment loadout had been carefully considered for the specific requirements of the mission. Weapons optimized for close-quarters combat, communication gear hardened against jamming attempts, and specialized equipment for breaching doors and barriers. The boat's keel scraped gently against sand as they reached the beach, the sound barely audible above the gentle wash of waves against the shore. Hollywood killed the engine and immediately began camouflaging the boat according to their rehearsed procedures, ensuring that it would remain undetected during their time on the island. Sarah took point as they moved inland, her movement patterns reflecting the specialized awareness that came from years of hunting human predators in similar environments. She navigated by memory and instinct, following a route that had been meticulously planned to avoid security cameras and observation posts while maintaining the shortest possible distance to their primary objective. The resort's exterior grounds were landscaped with tropical vegetation that provided excellent concealment for their approach, but also created multiple opportunities for defensive positions if the security force detected their presence. Marcus maintained overwatch as they moved through the carefully manicured gardens, his rifle ready, but his attention focused on identifying threats before they could compromise the mission. The main facility loomed ahead of them, its luxury architecture a stark contrast to the grim purpose it served. Intelligence photos had provided detailed floor plans and security specifications, but seeing the building in person added dimension to their understanding of the tactical challenges they would face once they penetrated the perimeter. Diesel moved into position near the service entrance that would provide their primary access point, his specialized equipment ready to defeat the electronic locks and alarm systems that protected the building's interior. His role in the mission required a combination of technical expertise and physical capability that few operators could match, and Marcus felt confident that their entry would proceed according to plan. Hollywood established overwatch from a concealed position that provided visual coverage of the main approaches to the building, his sniper rifle ready to engage any security forces that might threaten the team's exit routes. His transformation from lighthearted officer to deadly serious operator had been complete, and Marcus knew that he could count on Hollywood to maintain security regardless of what challenges developed inside the facility. Sarah conducted a final check of her specialized equipment, ensuring that the sensors and communication devices required for her victim recovery role were functioning properly. Her responsibilities during the mission went beyond conventional tactical operations, requiring skills and knowledge that had been developed through years of experience that none of the rest of them could fully understand. The team moved into their final positions with the coordinated precision that had been drilled into them through countless hours of rehearsal, each member understanding exactly what their role would be during the next critical phase of the operation. Marcus felt the weight of command settling on his shoulders as he prepared to give the signal that would initiate their assault on the facility. But as they prepared to begin the active phase of the mission, Marcus found himself thinking about the children inside the building who had no idea that rescue was imminent. 20 young people who had been failed by every system that was supposed to protect them, who were trapped in circumstances that most people couldn't imagine, who deserved to know that someone, somewhere, cared enough to risk everything for their safety. Sarah's voice came through the tactical communication system, calm and professional despite the emotional weight of what they were about to encounter. All positions ready.